For generations, mapmakers looking at the South Pacific saw only a vast, empty blue ocean dotted with a few isolated islands. The global charts that hung in classrooms and shipping offices showed a massive expanse of water between Australia and South America. New Zealand and New Caledonia appeared to be lonely outposts of rock, surrounded by thousands of miles of deep water. For centuries, researchers assumed these islands were simply volcanic peaks that had risen independently from the ocean floor. Then, in 2017, a team of international geologists made an announcement that reshaped our understanding of the planet. They revealed that New Zealand was not a collection of isolated islands, but the highest peaks of a massive, previously unrecognized eighth continent. This challenged the traditional model of 7 continents, showing that geological definitions are more complex than previously believed. For decades, oceanographers had suspected that the continental shelf surrounding New Zealand was more than just a submerged border, but proving it required data that did not yet exist. This landmass, which they named Zealandia, spans nearly 2 million square miles, making it roughly 6 times the size of Madagascar. Yet approximately 94% of it lies submerged beneath the waves. The paper, published in the journal GSA Today by geologist Nick Mortimer and his colleagues, was not based on a sudden discovery. Instead, it was the result of more than 20 years of gathering satellite data, studying seafloor rock samples, and analyzing magnetic mapping. To be classified as a continent, a region must meet several specific geological criteria. It must stand high relative to the surrounding oceanic crust. It must have a diverse range of rock types, including granite and metamorphic rocks, and its crust must be thicker and less dense than the seafloor. Zealandia met every single one of these requirements, proving that the planet had a hidden eighth continent. The surrounding ocean floor is thin and dense volcanic basalt, whereas Zealandia's crust is composed of lighter, thicker rock. The geologists collected samples from hundreds of dredge sites across the seafloor, recovering pieces of continental basement rocks that confirmed the structure of the landmass. To the scientific community, the recognition of Zealandia was a modern triumph of technology, ocean floor rock dredging, and satellite gravity measurements. But to the indigenous Maori people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, the idea of a vast landmass resting beneath the ocean was already part of their oldest history. For centuries, their oral traditions had described the North Island not as a permanent, unchanging feature of the earth, but as the body of a giant fish hauled up from the depths of the sea by the demigod Maui. In these traditions, the South Island was remembered as Maui's canoe, and Stewart Island was the anchor that held it steady in the storm. The Maori called the submerged continent Te Riu a Maui, which translates to the hills, valleys, and plains of Maui. This name reflects a deep understanding of the seafloor topography, describing the drowned valleys and mountains that lie beneath the water. The name Te Riu a Maui was officially recognized to honor the connection between the geological landmass and the cultural heritage of the region. By naming the continent after his valleys and plains, both scientists and elders acknowledged that the physical structure of the earth was linked to the ancestral stories of the people who inhabited it. These ancient stories did not describe a static world, but a dynamic, living landscape where powerful forces beneath the earth were constantly moving, shaping the land, and waiting to emerge. Today, researchers at GNS Science and other institutions are working to bridge the gap between Maturanga Maori, the traditional system of indigenous knowledge, and modern earth science. They are discovering that the stories of giant creatures living beneath the water and the earth are not mere folklore. Instead, they represent a precise, cross-generational record of geological hazards, earthquakes, and volcanic activity that have shaped this region for centuries. We are examining the mapping of the eighth continent, the science of New Zealand's violent geology, and the Maori traditions that recorded the active world beneath their feet. The geological reality of Zealandia is a story of extreme forces that began millions of years ago. Long before the first humans arrived in the South Pacific, this landmass was part of the supercontinent Gondwana, which also included Australia, Antarctica, South America, and Africa. Around 80 million years ago, Zealandia began to separate from the rest of the landmass. As Gondwana broke apart, Zealandia was stretched and thinned by powerful tectonic forces. This stretching process was similar to pulling a piece of warm wax, causing the land to spread out and lose its thickness. The continental crust, which is typically between 15 and 25 miles thick under dry land, was pulled so thin that most of it settled beneath the ocean. As the Tasman Sea opened between Australia and Zealandia, the thinning crust sank into the mantle. Today, most of the continent sits between 3,000 and 10,000 feet below sea level, with only New Zealand, New Caledonia, and a few small islands remaining above the water. For decades, the true shape of this landmass was hidden by the ocean. Then, in 2023, geologists completed the first comprehensive map of this submerged continent. By compiling bathymetric data and analyzing seafloor rock samples, researchers confirmed that Zealandia is a continuous geological structure. One of the most significant findings of this mapping project was the discovery of a continuous granite backbone that spans over 2,500 miles along the seafloor. This granite backbone is crucial, as granite is a type of rock that only forms deep within continental crust. Unlike the basaltic rock that makes up the surrounding ocean floor, granite is silica-rich and less dense, which allows the continental crust to float higher on the mantle. The presence of this rock across such a vast area proved that Zealandia was indeed a continent, rather than a collection of volcanic islands. The geological map published in 2023 allowed scientists to see the true boundaries of this submerged continent, showing that it stretches from the south of New Zealand all the way north to New Caledonia. This submerged landscape is not a flat plain. Oceanographic surveys have revealed a varied terrain of mountains, deep basins, and volcanic ridges. The reason for this complex terrain is the ongoing movement of the tectonic plates. Under New Zealand's North Island, the Pacific Plate is subducting beneath the Australian Plate along the Hikurangi subduction zone. This plate boundary is a place of intense pressure, where the heavier oceanic crust is forced down into the mantle beneath the lighter continental crust. The movement is not smooth, as the two plates grind against each other, creating intense friction and heat. This boundary is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region of intense seismic and volcanic activity where the Earth is constantly shifting. The forces that created these mountains are the same forces that caused the frequent earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that define the country. Geologists have found that the Hikurangi subduction zone is capable of producing massive earthquakes and tsunamis. The friction between the plates causes energy to build up over centuries until the rock suddenly breaks, releasing energy that shakes the land and displaces the sea. This active plate boundary runs along the eastern coast of the North Island, making the region one of the most seismically active places on Earth. By studying the rock layers and seabed formations, scientists are learning how these tectonic plates have moved over millions of years, shaping the mountains and valleys of both the dry land and the submerged continent. If you are enjoying this exploration of ancient land masses, the science of hidden continents, and the traditions that remember them, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps support this research and allows me to keep sharing these stories of the Earth's forgotten history. In the Māori worldview, these subterranean forces were personified as taniwha. In oral tradition, taniwha are powerful, supernatural beings that dwell in deep pools, rivers, caves, or beneath the sea. They were often described as guardians of specific territories, but they were also feared for their ability to cause destruction. For decades, Western observers viewed taniwha as imaginary monsters from myths. However, modern scientific assessments have revealed a direct correlation between taniwha legends and real environmental hazards. Many stories describe taniwha shaking the earth, causing rivers to change course, or swallowing entire villages in landslides. The areas designated as taniwha dens in oral history correspond to areas that geologists now map as active fault lines or landslide-prone zones. One of the most famous stories describes Wellington Harbor as a former freshwater lake inhabited by two taniwha, Ngake and Wataitai. According to the tradition, the lake was completely enclosed by hills, separating the fresh water from the salt water of the ocean. Ngake, who lived at the southern end of the lake, was restless and energetic. He wanted to break free into the open sea. Lashing his powerful tail and swimming with immense speed, he battered his way through the southern hills, carving the narrow entrance to the harbor and creating the passage to the ocean. The geography of the harbor entrance, with its steep cliffs and narrow channel, mirrors the description of Ngake's violent escape. The rocks that line the passage, known today as the Wellington Heads, were said to be the shattered remains of the barrier that once held the lake. The second Taniwa, Wataitai, lived at the northern end of the lake. He was gentler and slower, but when he saw Nyake break through to the sea, he decided to follow. Wataitai swam toward the new opening, but as he reached the area, the tide began to go out, and he became stranded on the shallow mudflats. Before he could escape, a sudden earthquake uplifted the land, trapping him permanently. Wataitai died on the dried seafloor, and his spirit left his body in the form of a bird called Tekeo. This bird flew to the top of a nearby hill, where it wept for the dead Taniwa. Today, the suburb of Hataitai preserves the name of the Taniwa, and Mount Victoria is known in Māori as Tangi Tekeo, which means the weeping of Tekeo. Geologists have confirmed that the Wellington region has been repeatedly reshaped by major seismic events. The story of Wataitai matches the geological history of the area. Around 1460 CE, a massive earthquake known as the Hauwhenua earthquake struck the Wellington fault line. The name Hauwhenua means the land destroyer. This earthquake caused the land around the harbor to rise by several feet. Before the earthquake, the Miramar Peninsula was a separate island, and the area between it and the mainland was a shallow channel. The tectonic uplift raised the seafloor, turning the channel into dry land and creating the Rongotai Isthmus. This geological event joined the island to the mainland, matching the story of Wataitai being stranded on the dry mud flats. Geological evidence shows that the Wellington Fault is capable of movement every few centuries, and the Hauwhenua earthquake is one of the most recent major ruptures before European arrival. The geothermal pathways of the North Island are also recorded in detail through the journey of the high priest Ngatoroi Rangi. Tradition holds that after arriving in Aotearoa on the Te Arawa canoe, Ngatoroi Rangi traveled inland and began to climb the freezing peak of Tongariro. As he neared the summit, he was caught in a lethal freezing storm. Near death, he called upon his sisters, Te Hoata and Te Pupu, who remained in the ancestral homeland of Hawaii, to send him fire to warm his freezing body. The sisters answered his call, traveling underground in the form of fire to reach him. The sisters, Te Hoata and Te Pupu, are personifications of heat and volcanic fire. Their journey from Hawaii represents the flow of geothermal energy along tectonic lines. The names of the geothermal features they created are recorded in traditional chants that serve as a map of the volcanic zone. As they traveled, they rose to the surface at several locations to check on their brother's progress, leaving a trail of geothermal heat behind them. They first emerged at Huakari, or White Island, in the north. They surfaced again at Rotorua, Tarawera, and Taupo, before finally reaching Ngatoroi Rangi at the summit of Tongariro. The fire they brought saved the priest's life. This oral tradition maps the Taupo volcanic zone, a region of intense geothermal activity. The path of the fire matches the line of volcanic vents, hot springs, and geysers that stretches across the island, showing that the Māori understood the connection between these distant geothermal features. The battles between these volcanic mountains are preserved in the story of the Battle of the Mountains. According to the legend, the great peaks of the Central Plateau, including Tongariro, Ngauruhoe, Ruapehu, and Taranaki, were once living warriors who stood together. They all fell in love with Mount Pihanga, a beautiful forested peak nearby. The mountains fought a fierce battle for her affection, throwing fire, smoke, and rocks at one another. Tongariro emerged victorious, and the defeated mountains were forced to leave the Central Plateau. Taranaki, filled with grief and anger, fled to the west. As he retreated, his heavy body carved a deep trench in the earth, which became the path of the Whanganui River. He eventually stopped near the western coast, where he stands today as an isolated peak. Geologists note that Mount Taranaki is indeed a separate volcanic system with a distinct geological history compared to the Central Plateau volcanoes. Taranaki is younger and compositionally different, reflecting the geographical truth embedded in the legend. To protect these sacred summits, Chief Te Hiuhiu Tukino Fort gifted the peaks of Tongariro, Ngauruhoe, and Ruapehu to the people of New Zealand in 1887, establishing the country's first national park. The constant movement of Ruaumoko, the god of earthquakes and volcanoes who remains underground, is a reminder that the Earth is not a static stage. In Maori cosmology, Ruaumoko is the youngest child of Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother, and Ranginui, the Sky Father. When the two parents were separated to allow light into the world, Papatuanuku was turned face down so she would not have to look at her husband. Ruaumoko was still at her breast and was carried beneath the earth. His movements within Papatuanuku are said to cause the earthquakes that shake the land and the volcanic heat that rises to the surface. The Maori understood that the landscape of Te Reo Maui was a living network of energy, where the movements of the earth were connected to these ancient deities. By using Mātauranga Maori alongside modern bathymetric and seismic data, researchers are developing a more complete understanding of New Zealand's geological history. The oral histories are not simple myths, but empirical records of a dynamic continent that continues to rise and fall. Indigenous observers did not have modern seismographs, satellite mapping, or carbon dating. However, they possessed the ability to observe the natural world and pass their observations down through generations. They noticed how the Earth moved, how coastlines shifted after major earthquakes, and how volcanic activity followed specific paths. By encoding these observations into stories of Taniwha and ancestral journeys, they created a durable archive of geological hazards. This traditional knowledge served a practical purpose. In many cases, the stories of Taniwha acted as ancient zoning laws. If a specific bend in a river was said to be the home of a dangerous Taniwha, it was a warning that the area was prone to flooding. If a cliff face was associated with a Taniwha that shook the earth, it warned people that the hillside was unstable and prone to landslides. Modern researchers have found that many of these traditional warning areas align with geologically hazardous zones. By mapping the locations of Taniwha legends, geologists can identify areas that are at risk of earthquakes or landslides using ancient memory to guide modern safety measures. The discovery of Zealandia and the mapping of its granite backbone also align with the traditional Maori concept of Te Reo Maui. The name describes the hills, valleys, and plains of Maui as a single, connected entity that lies beneath the sea. For decades, Western science viewed the islands of the South Pacific as isolated volcanic peaks. The 2017 scientific recognition of Zealandia confirmed what the Maori name had implied for centuries, that these islands are connected by a single, continuous continental crust. The 2023 geological mapping of the 2,500-mile granite backbone provided physical proof of this connection, showing that the dry land of New Zealand is just a small part of a much larger, submerged continent. This integration of Mātauranga Maori and modern science shows how two different systems of knowledge can reach the same conclusion about the land. The story of Zealandia and the traditions of Aotearoa show that the history of our planet is recorded in more than one way. It is written in the layers of rock, the granite backbone, and the faults that run beneath the ocean. But it is also written in the memory of the people who have lived on the land for generations. These two records do not contradict each other. Instead, they offer different perspectives on the same active landscape. The mapping of the eighth continent is a reminder that the world is still full of hidden places, and that the stories passed down through oral tradition may hold the keys to understanding them. As scientists continue to explore the depths of Te Reo Maui, they will undoubtedly uncover more geological secrets. At the same time, the preservation of Mātauranga Maori ensures that the human connection to this changing landscape will not be lost. The stories of Ngake and Wataitai, the journey of Ngatoroi Rangi, and the battles of the mountains are not just tales from the past. They are the living memory of a continent that continues to shift, volcanic peaks that continue to simmer, and an Earth that remains active. By listening to both the science and the stories, we can develop a deeper respect for the forces that shape the ground we walk on. Thanks for watching. If you want to help us uncover more stories of lost worlds and the traditions that remember them, please consider subscribing for future videos. I would love to hear your take on this. Do you think the stories of Taniwha and ancestral journeys are effective ways of preserving records of natural disasters, or do you see them as purely spiritual narratives? Leave a comment with your thoughts, and I will see you in the next episode.